All right, so we're going to add some color to this now, right? So that would be sort of like your next step. So I have my drawing, I have my lines transferred on here. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my tools together. I'm going to need my little watercolor set. We're going to do some layering. We're going to start with watercolor, and then we are going to, after we do our watercolor, we're going to add a little bit of colored pencil and some marker if we wanted to sharpen things up a little bit. But for now, I'm going to start with this. So the brush that comes in here, it's actually not too bad of a brush. It's a hair brush, which is good. It's not a synthetic brush, so it should work pretty good. And then you have a pretty good variety of colors in here. I'm going to need some paper towels for blotting, some sort of tissue or whatever that you're going to need. And then I have a little cup of water right here. It's always a handy thing to do to clean your brushes. And then I have my pencil, my eraser in case I need it. So step one is I'm going to lightly go back into my drawing here. And even with my 4H pencil, I've got a pretty heavy hand. I sort of know that about myself. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to try to erase some of these extra dark lines in here and just sort of lighten up my whole drawing. All right, because again, I don't mind if there's some pencil in my drawing, which is fine. It'll help to denote some of the shapes and some of the areas here. But I just don't want it to be like super dark, right? And over here I made a couple of changes. I got my hand here. Got these piano keys up here. I'm just sort of lightly erasing. I'm not really pressing very hard. I'm just dragging my eraser across here. You guys have those couple of little erasers that came in your kit. Those little wedge erasers are fine. Just like so. And then what we did with Megan's, I took a picture of those hands you just saw a little bit ago. You could use a program like that Sketchpad, or you could just take a picture of it in your on your iPad and start to figure out what colors you're going to use. Having a color plan or a color scheme is probably a good idea. If it's patriotic, it might be red, white, and blues you might use or something like that. If it's for a certain country, if it's for Mexico, you might use the green and red and some white in there. So, think about what your colors are going to be. I'm just going to do a nice kind of a primary and secondary palette here because I just feel like music is all sorts of different colors and all sorts of different things in my mind. I just know that I'm going to make these two figures a little darker first, and then I'm going to make these letters here. I think I'm going to make these sort of multicolored. And like I said, I was talking about maybe making these piano keys in the background here sort of multicolored as well. So let me get rid of these lines in the middle here. Those lines in the middle of these. In the middle of these. Middle of these two. And I'm going to screw these up trying to get them right, but that's all right. All right, so here we are with this. So let me start. Again, if you remember, when we talked about our superheroes, there's a couple of different watercolor techniques. One is sort of a dry brushing, where you're just brushing color right onto the dry paper. Another one is where you are getting the paper wet a little bit, and then you are letting the color sort of bleed in these different areas. I would say if you are going to do any sort of wet on wet or anything in this particular painting, is just be careful. This paper is pretty heavy, but it's not super thick, right? It's, what do you call it? It's so too much water on here, too much rubbing, too much whatever, you're gonna eat a hole in the paper. It's gonna dissolve the paper, right? All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my brush. I'll just put a little bit of water on my brush here. Sorry, that's sort of off camera. And I'm gonna paint out a little bit of this figure with some water. So I'm just getting water on my brush, no paint involved here, and I'm just painting this area. And you gotta work a little quickly here when you're doing wet on wet. I'm just going to get this sort of damp here. All right, then I'm going to select a color, and I'm going to use this darkish blue color here. So again, I'm just using this here. If you want to mix some colors, you can use the tray over here. All right, let's say I want to add a little bit of this violet in here, like that. And then I'm just going to paint this in here. And I'm going to start to let this go. And you can see how the water, if my paper is wet, it starts to bleed into that area there. Just like so. All right, and then it's called like a capillary action. What I can do is I can just put water on my brush, and I'm just pulling this color down the sleeve here, right down the arm. And you can see, like, again, look at how I'm holding my brush. Like, it's sort of weird, but I'm not holding my brush even like a pencil. I'm holding it like on its side, almost like a surgical tool here. All right, and then when I run out of space here, I want to make sure that as I'm letting that watercolor dry, I'm letting it dry at like an edge, right? Like I want it to sort of fade out here. So I'll paint this down here. That. I'm going to add a little bit more pigment to my water. I'm going to do this up here. The other thing about paint, watercolor paint, is that there is a pan of white paint in there, but white watercolor paint does not work like white acrylic paint. Like, it's not opaque, it doesn't cover it up completely. So really, if you want an area to be white or highlighted, you're going to want to leave it the color of the paper. Like, you're going to want to let it just be the paper. All right, so that's pretty good there. So add a little bit more pigment here to my water. All right, trying to do some smooth brushing here. All right, now I'm just using water on this one, just like so. Letting the water just sort of pull the paint around. I'm going to take a little more of this blue and put the blue in here. Ugh, too much blue. Darn it. All right. So if I have too much blue in here, I don't like this. I'm going to spread it out a little bit. I can use my paper towel. I do not want to scrub with my paper towel. If I scrub with my paper towel, it is going to rip a hole in my paper. But I'm just going to lightly dab this paper here. And you at home, if you have a paper towel, it'll work much better. This paper towel at school is almost anti-absorbent. I don't know. There we go. So I just use that paper towel and I'm just sort of blotting that up like that. And then I can use my paintbrush and I can put a little bit of water on here. And again, I'm just using water and I'm just sort of smoothing that out like that. So that was okay. Emergency, crisis averted there. That's where I'm using using this tray is important. I'm just sort of adding some water and I'm thinning it out here.
Are you in class right now?
We are, yes.
Okay, enjoy.
Oh, thanks. So I'm just sort of thinning it out here. And I'm going to add a little bit more color down here in this leg. And I'm just trying to blend, right? Just trying to blend here. See what we got. Like so. Here. Come up in this E. All right. And the other thing about this watercolor piece is that I don't need to do it all in one swoop here, right? I can come back and I can add paint, right? I can add another layer of color once that color is dry. Like if I want to accent an area and make it a little darker, I can certainly do that later. But here I just kind of like how the paint is, it's not the same blue all over. It's sort of purplish blue. I'm mixing in some of those other colors. Just like so. There you go. See, the problem with the dry brushing is you can see here in this part that if my paper is not wet as I'm painting, I get those weird transitional areas there where I can see where the two different colors sort of met up. So I want to try to use water to push this paint around here if I can, as much as possible. But if you paint it with water first too, the paint will just sort of go right into those little channels. Like it won't paint over into the other areas. All right, turn sideways. Like that. Like so. Already I can start a different, a little bit darker value up here. I'm going to overlap this a little bit and sort of let it fade out. Just like that. All right, I might purposefully do a little light and shadow here. All right, so if I come back with some paint up here, I re-go over this part here. So let that be darker like that. Water in there. I'm just trying to make that not look like a face, like a weird thing happening there. Alright, that's looking good. Let's come up here a little bit and see what I can do. Here. Maybe a little more color in there. Like so. There we go. Just let that color sort of bleed in there. A little bit of purple in here. Now a little bit just water. Right, if I don't like how this is getting sort of heavy in here, I just clean my brush with water and I'm just sort of, again, pulling this paint around with water. Right. And again, with watercolor, you just can't be in a hurry. Cannot be in a hurry. All right, and I just keep layering here. It gets darker every time I put a layer on top. All right, and I kind of like the way that white looks. I'm going to let those letters be white for now, and then I'm going to figure out what to do with that later. So I'm just going to get these fingers up here, and then I'm going to be done. Like this. And again, when you look at a brush, like this brush is not a tiny brush like this way, but it has a pretty small tip on it. So even for these fingers up here, again, I can go. I can get a pretty good amount of detail. Like it's not always about having the skinniest brush. Because if you have a tiny brush with no bristles on it, it's not going to hold any paint and it's going to be really hard to use. But this way, it actually fits just like that. There it goes, a little darker there. Oops. My hand in there. Awesome. All right, so there you go. So that's my first, sort of my first layer, my first pass at that figure. I'm going to start adding to this second figure over here in just a minute. But the rest is, I'm going to stop this recording now, and I'm going to switch over. I'm going to do a fast video recording, do a time lapse, and maybe I'll start filming the rest of the color there.